Fresh hell.
There's another conglomeration of severed fingers in the last room, coating the room's interior like the innards of an exploded elephant. Parts of the sprawl are feeling their way, like mold, into a medical cabinet, and the rest is splayed over a fetal shape on a medical gurney. The mass reacts sharply to the new light as Wheeler opens the door, rearing up and angling parts of itself towards him. Wheeler reels backwards and pulls the door to just in time, and there is a heavy, fleshy thump as the mass hits the door from the far side. The door holds. Wheeler trips on his own foot and slumps against the far wall. The shape on the gurney was a coiled up human. Not a corpse, but a living human with one wide open eye whose whole body was slowly being consumed and processed into more fingers. They were growing out of his throat. Wheeler didn't see this. He thinks he saw it, but he knows he couldn't have. And that's it. Wheeler casts around the corridor. Every other door he's tried is blocked or locked. The place is below ground, so no windows. No navigable ventilation. There are 2 more gunshots up at the far end of the corridor, ear-splitting in the enclosed space and echoing for many seconds. Hutchinson rounds the corner at a dead run, gun in hand, and reaches him quickly.
Find a way out?
She asks pointlessly. She can read Wheeler's expression. He's found nothing good. This place is infested. Wheeler says, every room, all the staircases. This is absurd. At the far end of the corridor, the main mass heaves itself around the corner. From this distance, it looks like an ambulatory 8-ton pile of moldy mashed potato and fat, wiggling maggots. There are toes in there, as well as fingers and small teeth and bits of bone. It has 20 bullet holes in it, and blood is flowing from all of them, but if it has vital organs, they must be elsewhere in the building because none of the wounds have slowed it down or otherwise altered its slow, methodical homing behavior. It smells powerfully and creatively disgusting, like concentrated medical waste. It lurches forward in intermittent phases, coating the walls and floor with scarlet ooze as it moves. It'll be on them in about half a minute, squashing them against the end of the corridor and then pulling them into the mess to be remade. I think we're done, Wheeler quavers. Thanks for trying. Hutchinson, for her part, just stands there, gun lowered.
Watching the thing come. I'll take over here. It moves slowly like a steamroller. It fills the corridor almost to the ceiling. She has 2 bullets left, and she's considering where to spend them. Shooting the mass itself is like shooting pudding. She'd kill for a grenade. Even a fire axe would be something. She might not be able to stop the thing, but she could at least make herself known with a fire axe. She could make it feel some regret.
There are worse fates, I guess, Wheeler goes on, finding himself unable to stop talking, than being digitized by that thing, but not all that many.
Hutchinson glances in his direction, apparently paying direct attention for the first time since they met 60 very crowded minutes ago. Riser cupboard?
What?
She pushes Wheeler aside. There's a white painted wall behind them. There's a lock in it and a long vertical seam. She spends a moment choosing the right part of the lock to shoot and shoots it out. Behind the tall, wide panel which opens is a shallow, dusty, metal-edged space like an elevator shaft with no elevator, allowing filthy pipes and cables to pass vertically between floors. She looks up. There's just enough room to admit a person. Can you climb? She asks Wheeler. Without waiting for a response, she sheds her suit jacket, sticks a flashlight between her teeth, and hauls herself up into the darkness. After a brief moment of scuffling, there's another gunshot. The other riser cupboard door.
No, Wheeler finally manages. No, I can't climb. The mass is almost on him. He's transfixed by its motion. It's all too familiar, grasping behavior.
I figured, Hutchinson calls down. A hand descends. A human one with the conventional number of fingers. It's clear up here. Come on, I'm braced. Mind the lip, though. It's metal. Come on!
Wheeler keeps his own jacket on and buttoned. It's the only part of the situation over which he still has firm control. He has to jump to catch hold of Hutchinson's hand, and just as he jumps, the main mass lunges for him, crossing the last few meters in a rush and catching hold of him by 1 foot. He sees himself die. His sweating hand immediately starts to slip out of Hutchinson's. She braces her other arm and hauls him up 15 or 30 centimeters with an angry grunt, then releases his hand for a split second and reaches down like a flash to take firmer hold of his wrist.
She keeps pulling. The mass closes around Wheeler's foot like aggressive, proactive quicksand. He yelps and kicks at it with his other foot until it finally pries his shoe loose. The mass retreats for a second, taking a crucial moment to realize that its prize is not living flesh. But by that time, Hutchinson has hauled Wheeler up another half meter, and Wheeler has started pushing himself upwards off the pipework with his feet. The mass lunges again, but falls short, and seems too unintelligent to climb after them. It sloshes around, probing its surroundings, perplexed by the shoe. Hutchinson hauls Wheeler over the lip into the next corridor. He scrapes his ribs badly and arrives crawling, eyes watering. He didn't die. He can still see himself dying. He stays on all fours for a significant amount of time, processing what just happened.
Fuck!
Hutchinson is already standing and apparently not even significantly exerted. We need to get to the roof. I might be able to get a signal out from there.
You're at the gym pretty often, Wheeler pants, sitting back. You train for fresh hell like this.
Yeah?
That's great, Wheeler says, because I play the violin. It's not quite as physically demanding as careers go, I mean, when you said you were a county health inspector, that was an enormous lie, wasn't it?
Hutchinson ignores the question out of habit and waits impassively for the man to cool.
This is asinine, Wheeler declares. This is brain damage. His skin crawls and grotesque visions flood through his brain. Eventually, he recovers his breath and gets to his feet. He stands lopsided, so he takes his other shoe off and throws it back down the riser for symmetry.
We need to get to the roof.
Wheeler blinks a long blink, then focuses on something around the corner. Something on the wall which Hutchinson can't see from where she's standing. Yeah, 1 second. He goes to it. It's a red panel and pulls something down. Here, you were having no luck with the gun. Try this.
It's a fire axe.
He stepped on a rusty nail backstage after the show and came to the emergency room for a tetanus injection. While waiting, he slowly realized that more than half of the people waiting with him were clutching partially or entirely severed fingers. Bandsaw accidents, hands caught in doors, hands trapped in door hinges, hands crushed in machinery. Every one of them unrelated. There was an epidemic of physical injury, which should have been impossible, and when he tried to bring it up with the medical staff, they didn't seem to understand what he was saying. And then he saw one of the fingers escape. He followed it as it wriggled away down a long corridor to a far corner of the hospital, to an ajar door which nobody in the hospital seemed to be able to perceive, except for him, and into a different building where there were no people at all, just hundreds and hundreds of wriggling, exploring, slowly reproducing, and lengthening fingers. He slammed the door and tried and failed to get anyone, staff or patient, to see what he was seeing. He found a payphone and dialed for emergency services and ordered off the menu, asking for emergency industrial scale pest control or hazardous containment or psychic support or something. And there was a long pause, and he was connected to what was either a very measured, dispassionate human or an impressively articulate robot operator. It told him to wait by the phone. An associate would be with him shortly. Marion Hutchinson arrived in person slightly less than 15 minutes later. He showed her the door. They went a few paces inside. Hutchinson crouching and aiming some kind of flashlight scanner at the finger worms. Behind them, something reached out and gently pushed the door closed with a click. They turned and saw what it was and ran.
I forgot about that part. Oh, God. Hutchinson hacks her way through the flesh-clogged stairwell. They're almost at the roof. This part of the This part of the distributed infestation doesn't seem to be mobile, although it is freakishly grabby. Wheeler stands 3 paces back from her, partially to avoid the backswing, but mostly so he doesn't have to watch. It's butchery, and it's grisly, and Hutchinson barely seems perturbed by it. She slices methodically until there are waterfalls of gore coming down the stairs, soaking her shoes and his socks, and she does it with the manner of someone trimming a hedgerow. Hunk! Crunch!
Wheeler is shivering, and Wheeler is starting to crash. If he doesn't stay still, right in the middle of the stairwell, the remaining fingers target his hair and his sleeves, and in another few minutes it may finally dawn on him that this is really happening. This is crazy. This is nuts, he says to himself over and over.
What was that word you used back there?
What?
Crunch. Don't tune out. When the mass was coming down the hall, did you say digitized?
Wheeler seems to change gear. Seems to wake up. Yeah, but in the old sense of the word.
Digit meaning finger, so digitize meaning turned into fingers. I just got it. She's smiling. He can tell for the sound of her voice. Clunk! That's great.
It is?
What kind of violin music?
What kind would you like? Yesterday's concert was Prokofiev's Violin Concerto No. 1, and a few other pieces, of course, but that was the main course for me. That was where I got my teeth in.
Hutchinson stops hacking and turns around. She actually looks him in the eye. That piece is a nightmare.
It's a challenge. Admits Wheeler brightly.
No, I mean, it's chaotic. It's unlistenable.
I can play anything you like, Wheeler states.
Hutchinson appears to spend a moment considering this possibility. Bach. You can play some Bach.
Just get me to a violin.
Hutchinson thinks for a moment longer. She smiles and nods and goes back to hacking. As they hit the roof, Hutchinson's radio finally works, and she calls everything in. She speaks in rapid keywords, and Wheeler can't quite follow, although he can pick out his own name and hazmat, and a repeated word which sounds to him like a brand of cassette tape. Memetics? It's very nearly dawn. This wing of the hospital is a few stories shorter than its main body, so rows of bright-lit wards look down over the roof, where the roof looks out over 2 sprawling car parks, and then greenery and roads, and a faint, dull red where the sun is due to come up. Hutchinson Hutchinson quickly ascertains that there is no fire escape from here. The intended fire exit from the roof is the stairwell up, which they just came, so they'll have to wait for a helicopter. Or more, and likely, and less romantically, a long ladder. Backup is coming, she concludes. They'll have to come in from the next city over, so it could be a few hours. They'll have decontamination gear, antibiotics, blankets, tedious debriefing forms, you name it. But more importantly, coffee.
Oh, God, I have another concert today, he says. He sits on the thick perimeter wall, rubs his eyes, rubs his sore feet, and begins to shut down.
You'll be there. The nasty part is over. You did well for a civilian. I've seen far worse.
Worse than this?
Hutchinson says nothing.
I'm sorry. Wheeler opens his eyes again. He gestures at the mayhem from which they just escaped. The fire door and everything it leads to. It is all still down there. You've seen worse than this.
Hutchinson, again, says nothing.
What is this? What happened here?
At first, Hutchinson doesn't answer this either. She walks across the roof and spends an entire minute staring at the forthcoming sun. And then Surprising Wheeler and slightly surprising even herself, she walks back to him. SCP-4051, which is the number we just assigned to this infestation, has an intrinsic property which makes it nearly impossible for sapient organisms to perceive it. It's a form of camouflage. It's not invisible, it's a mental blocking effect. Information about it goes nowhere, it gets suppressed. People walk past this building every day of the week. They don't see what's blocking the windows. They walk past that door and don't realize it's standing open. It could have been here for decades. The researchers will get the whole story eventually.
Wheeler finds in this explanation something he halfway understands. So, living fjords.
And this actually slows Hutchinson down for a second. She gets that reference. She read those books when she was younger, years ago, before joining the Foundation, but she's never made the connection between fjords and the work she does. For as long as she's been working there, she hasn't even thought about it. The irony is intense enough to burn. Yeah.
Except that you can see them.
I have specialist training, she says, declining to mention her drug regimen.
And I also can see them.
You seem to have a mild natural immunity to memory clouding phenomena. It's rare, but it happens. At a hospital this busy, someone like you was bound to stumble into this place sooner or later. And escape alive, she privately adds. But the point is, this infestation, SCP-4051, is a snowflake. I don't mean that it's special and unique. I mean, it's part of a blizzard. I work for an independent scientific research institution with a specialist focus on the containment of hazardous, anomalous phenomena. We have an international mandate and formidable resources and unimaginable responsibilities. We watch the blizzard and we guard the little fire. We're called the Foundation.
Wheeler's full attention is on her now. He feels tense and exposed here, vulnerable to extraordinary natural forces from which, by rights, he should be fleeing. But he's also fascinated. Hutchinson has a faintly ethereal attitude to her. It's as if she's not standing on the same planet as everybody else. So you're not FBI. Either. I mean, that was my other guess.
Hutchinson wrinkles her nose. I hate that show.
I do not believe I mentioned this show.
They do everything wrong. A nerve has been touched. She shuffles irritably. They don't have enough people. They don't trust each other. They don't spend nearly enough time on paperwork. Paperwork saves lives. But most of all, I hate the will they or won't they. For what? 5 years? It's force. It's fractal. She glares at Wheeler. It doesn't take that long to know. You will or you won't. And then you do.
You do?
Yeah, Hutchinson says again, smiling. Yeah, I think you do. A distant, rapid thudding noise slowly becomes apparent. Hutchinson sees the source of the sound first and points. Backup's here. And it looks like we raided a helicopter after all. How many pianos did you think they need?
So many.
So many.
Should we do the next chapter?
You got your toys, right? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. Oh, hi.
Foundation agent George Barson is monolithic. George is nearly 2 meters tall. He is rectangular shouldered. He looks like a Bruce Timm cartoon. He is bald. He is bearded. He is immaculately presented. His suit is tailored. There are a few which will fit him off the rack. He arrives at the Green Place first thing after dawn, 6 a.m. The address is isolated, an acre or two of ill-maintained scrubland off a spur of the main highway north out of Ojai. Barson is part of the Foundation's Anomalous Religious Expressions Division. They do cults. Green is not the name of the cult which Barson is here to confront. It is a codename. Barson doesn't know the real name. At the briefing last night, it was explained that there are legitimate security reasons to use codenames instead of true names here, but those reasons were not explained. Barson, no fool, took this to mean that there is some form of cognito hazard surrounding the true names, or perhaps a memory clouding phenomenon which makes them impossible to record, or, and he has dealt with Foundation research staff for far too many years to not consider this, somebody just straight up forgot to record the real names and is trying to cover for themselves. If there's an SCP number, he hasn't been told it. The house is an ugly white sprawl. One-story, wood construction, no two windows alike in design. Decaying. There are piles of junk, lumber, rusted vehicle components, drums of filthy green water. Willow and sycamore trees are encroaching from 2.5 sides, drizzling leaves and seeds and miscellaneous biological gunk all over the roof, clogging the gutters. Through the windows, only closed curtains and blinds are visible. The front door is standing ajar. Barsin proceeds inside, cautiously. The entrance opens almost directly onto a large lounge diner kitchen. The room is darkened, light mostly spilling from the entrance door. Barsin leaves that open and feeling its way around the edges of the window coverings. The place is dirty and smells of mold. The still air is like an oven, and it is extremely quiet, except for the faint, animated sound of someone talking away down the hall. Words not entirely clear.
Wasps, and yeah, it's gonna be sharp inside. When you're made to move, that's you'll bleed from.
Barsim goes down the hall, passing a wall decoration which was once a mirror but has now been completely painted over in black. After a brief search, during which he ascertains that the rest of the house is empty, he comes to the final room. This door is closed, but the focused rambling is coming from inside.
At home, it's super easy. I'm going to give you something. An easy 2-part project for you to take away. And don't forget Elethmanif below. Part 1. Find someone weaker than you.
Barsin knocks loudly. Twice. The patter stops. Nothing else is heard. Barsin opens the door. The room is dark, its window blocked with a thick curtain. There's a computer desk in the corner opposite the door, about as clustered as a desk can realistically get, strewn with partially disassembled hardware, USB keys, chocolate wrappers, scraps of paper, ballpoint pens.
Hey man, get out of my office.
Your stuff is... Our shit's organized, it's fine. There's a gaming mouse, unable to move for junk. There's a good quality video camera setup. A monitor, video feeds on the monitor. Dust. There is a cheap skeletal swivel chair in front of the monitor and a young man of about 20 slouched uncomfortably in the chair. He is skinny, with discolored, pale skin, which Barsin thinks could be caused by malnutrition. He has what was at one point a stylish, fashionable haircut, but is now in some disrepair, and when he turns around, Barsin sees that he has dark rings around his eyes. It looks as if he hasn't slept in a year. He reeks. The room is filled with that odor, almost thick enough to see. In the same way that the anomalous viral religious phenomenon, the cult, gathering around and above this young man like an anvil cloud, is named green, he himself is named red. Good morning, Barsin says. We saw your streams. The youth pulls his headphones down.
The fuck are you?
My name is George Barsin. I'm part of an organization which...
Red launches out of his chair like a rabid greyhound from a cage. He comes fist first, losing the headphones. Barsin shifts his weight slightly to his left, leaning away from the punch. He catches Red's arm and pulls it forward, violently, deflecting the attack's momentum and bringing the youth teeth first into the doorframe. Red stumbles back, crouching. He finds his footing swiftly. Froth, developing at the corners of his mouth, is mixing with blood. Scrambling around the junk on the floor, he puts his hands on the soldering iron. You want to take it there?
As Red comes forward again, Barsin wastes a critical split second trying to trace the iron's cable to figure out whether it's plugged in and hot or not. It's not, but that's enough distraction that Red gets right up there, driving the iron up into Barsin's gut with both hands. There's an electronic screech and a spark of orange light. The iron holds Barsin's shirt, but skitters off his abdomen, opening a long tear. There's bare skin underneath. His shield is invisible, partly mythical, and protects his seemingly exposed head just as well as the rest of him. Barsin takes Red in a headlock, Some haphazard kicking ensues, less well choreographed. Red has a demon's energy behind him, but Barson has, to be blunt, arrived prepared. In a few more moves, Red is disarmed, stunned, flat on his back, and good for nothing. Barson takes stock. The number of genuine fight-for-your-life fights he's been in is still in single digits. This one ranks about in the middle. 15 seconds of activity, both of them made mistakes. A learning experience. Then I'll dispense with the introductions. The live streaming vector was novel. We haven't seen that before. Very effective compared to the generic self-help book and walled compound model. You get 1 point for originality, out of 10. But we predicted it decades back and we had the containment procedures ready to go. We have people at the streaming services. As I speak, we're locking you out of your account. We're using your own channels to distribute inoculation codes. Barson tries to tidy his shirt up. It's not going to work. Never mind. But you're the source, he says. A simple inoculation code would glance off. Physical intervention is required. He reaches inside his jacket, where he has a perfectly serviceable gun, which he elected to leave where it is for this confrontation, and produces a device not unlike an ophthalmologist's... Close? Ophthalmologist's scope. He kneels, lifts Red's right eyelid and aims the scope at it, projecting a brilliant white spot of light, which bathes the entire eye and causes it to lock open. Almost all of Red's musculature locks up as well, effectively pinning him to the floor. His teeth clench. Barson says to Red, "This man is innocent. Nobody can deserve what you have done to him. Release him and leave this reality forever."
Through gritted teeth, Red says, "Who the fuck are you?"
All right. Barson pushes another button, changing the projected light pattern from a pure white disc into a complex spiral star design in red and blue. There is a crack, like ribs being forced apart, and the youth screams. It doesn't sound like Red. It's a full body scream, anguished and hopeless, and as loud as he's physically able to make it. It comes up from his belly and goes on flat out until he runs out of breath and gasps and does it again, arching his back and clawing at the floor. After the second full breath, he cools down to a sobbing wail.
"Jesus Christ, don't send me back, please."
"I won't. It's okay."
"Don't send me back, I can't see. Who's there?"
"It's okay. You'll get your sight back. My name's George. What's yours?"
"There's a pit," the youth says, choking, "and it always gets worse. It doesn't stop. There's no bottom." He babbles incoherently for a moment and then trails off. His eyes dance blindly.
"You're in a really bad place right now."
The youth venomously agrees.
"Something has gone wrong," Barson explains, "and that thing, that horrific thing which went wrong, has found you and abducted you and replaced you. It's out here now, using your skin as a finger puppet, walking you around, making you talk, and replicating. That nightmare you're having is being had by 100,000 people right now. That is the bad news. The good news is that we caught you, and I can still see you in there, and there's a good chance that we can get you out."
"A good chance?" The youth breathes twice. If you can't."
"Focus on the red and blue spiral," Barson says. He still has the scope pointed at the youth's eye.
"What? I can't see anything."
"That's because you're not directly connected to this optic nerve anymore, but your mind is locked inside something which is. You can't see the spiral, but somehow you know what it looks like. You can sense its shape, like a pattern of heat on the back of your hand." Barson's voice is becoming slower, taking on a hypnotic rhythm. The spiral idea is going in. It's spreading and flourishing, occupying more space. The more you think about the spiral, the more you realize you can't think about anything but the spiral.
The youth seems to have nothing to say to this. His breathing stabilizes.
"Your thoughts are slowed," Barson continues. "The spirals fill you up, recursively, like ice crystals, until you can't move. Your brain knows it's being poisoned. Even though you're blind, you feel a reflexive need to look away or block out what you're seeing. A long enough exposure is fatal. There is a long, heavy pause, during which Barsin does nothing but shine poisonous light into the young man's eye, while studying that brightly illuminated eye himself, tracking the progress of the ocular response, waiting for a particular tell. This is not a clear-cut thing. There is a small amount of guesswork. George waits until he's sure. Finally, he releases the button on the scope, shutting it off. And the youth is now completely inert. Barsin stands up, knees creaking. He relaxes, sighs. His shoulders untense a little. He puts the scope away. You can think of this as mimetic chemotherapy, he says. He says it to himself, mostly, to fill dead air. The young man can only hear pink fuzz right now. The spiral symbol is an elementary cognito poison. A long exposure is fatal, but a just barely non-fatal exposure is recoverable. You will recover from this poison, and Red cannot. You will survive, and Red will die. Because you, my man, are an intelligent, creative human being, and Red is, he reflects on his briefing, on what he knows of the green phenomenon, and the 100,000 people suffering and raving inside it right now. They are in all parts of the globe. He has seen some photos of what takes place in homes occupied by Red's appalling messages. He has heard a strictly limited amount of highly redacted audio. Dispassionate people make better field decisions. That's the rule George was always taught, but remaining dispassionate is harder on some days than on others. A piece of shit. Barsin potters around the room for a little while, taking a closer look at some of the computer hardware. Nothing notable there, although he finds a stand for the soldering iron. There's also a narrow camp bed in the room with a bedraggled sleeping bag. He clears the sleeping bag away and loads the youth onto the camp bed in a recovery position. He pulls the curtain open. It is an obnoxiously sunny day, and the sun is aimed right in through that window. Finally, Barsin picks up the swivel chair and settles into it on the far side of the room, where he can keep an eye on his patient. He pulls a Foundation-issued phone from his pocket, along with a horrendously tangled pair of cheap earbuds, which he begins to untangle. He relaxes into his monologue. It's not as if anybody is listening. Fact is, I didn't need to come here. There's more than one way to physically intervene when something like green comes around. You know what the original plan was when we found out about you? Orbital laser to the top of the head. We can do that, my man. From time to time, your house will be a circle of scorched timber with you a burnt marshmallow at the center of it. That's our latest methodology for dealing with virulent single culpability mimetic anomalies. We do it at arm's length, at the longest possible distance, unblinkingly and unfeelingly, and to hell with the details. It's brutal. It's impersonal. It's very expensive in orbital laser maintenance. We say to ourselves that it's effective. Maybe it is. I'm not at that level. I don't get to see the statistics. But what I do know is that we can always do better, and I looked at the file, and I looked at you, and I took a long shot. Honestly, I'm a very small guy in the grand scheme, but I stood up in a pretty intense meeting with people who I don't really have the authority to say anything to, and I said to them, this is a paraphrase, there is a completely innocent child at the center of this. He doesn't deserve this. At minimum, we've got to make the gesture. A shadow passes across the room. Barsin looks around, briefly, but whatever it is has gone. He thinks nothing of it. And then I also said, if it works, it'll save us a boatload of money. I think that part was the part that got their attention. But I got the thumbs up, so here I am. Trying to save your life the hard way instead of just atomizing it. It'll probably take all day, 6, 10 hours. Don't worry. I've got podcasts. He finishes untangling the earbuds and screws the first of them into his left ear.
Your people must really hate you.
Shit. Barsin draws late. Obviously, nobody should be able to talk right now, but the real reason he draws late is that the comment lands. It should just pass him by, but there is a sharp, spiteful element of truth to it. Truthfully, nobody was a fan of this idea. Barson has been saying for a long time, with gradually increasing volume, to gradually increasingly senior Foundation overseers that a chat beats a fight. He's been ignored, over and over. Yesterday, when they finally said that he could try it, it was grudgingly, and so a momentary flicker of foul suspicion appears. Did they know? Did they really just kill him? They didn't. He knows. Of course they didn't. But it's too late. As he fumbles the gun out, Red has already sat up, grinning like a ventriloquist's puppet, and turned his head to look right at Barson. They make eye contact, and this time Red's eyes are open all the way, allowing Barson to see through to what's on the other side. Green comprehension leaps out of the pit at Barson and grounds itself in the back of his skull. He recoils instinctively, breaking the connection, covering his eyes. He stumbles, falling backwards out of the chair and into the corner of the room. His orange crystalline shield fluctuates, panicking in its own way because of what just passed through it. Intermittently, it turns impermeable, cutting off Barson's frantic breathing. Then it snaps off and dies. Barson does not have the training to fully understand the idea complex he was just exposed to. He has a basic level of practical memetics training. He can administer the spiral treatment and a few others, and protect himself from certain attacks which would knock a generic human over like a domino. But he is an entry-level practitioner. He's not a specialist. He's not a scientist. The sheer scope of Green is beyond his ability to comprehend. He feels like one of the men Louis Slotin irradiated, a Demon Core criticality witness. He knows he's dead. The only question is how long it's going to take.
Red swings his legs off the bed and stands, keeping his grin fixed on Barson. A spinning red and blue light? How backward are you? He seems to grow larger and to sink backwards into space, a hole where a human should be. Barson finds he can't make himself move out of the corner. It's like he's pinned. There's a creeping, staticky numbness in his hands.
He understands his error now. He might as well have tried to poison the ocean. He sees the whole thing. Red's grotesque vision for the world. Its immense, vicious promise. The rot is everywhere. Those 100,000 infected are a foretaste. The spores are flourishing secretly in every aspect of reality. In people's lungs, in their minds, their words, in the soil, in the sky. Maggots and cancers and star signals. How can anyone think like that? How could anyone want that? Barson means it in the singular. There is no distinction between Red and whoever that original human was. There's no one to rescue. It was a damn ruse. It was voluntary. You made this happen. It didn't abduct you, you invited it. Hacked your own soul in half and offered the pieces up for no reason at all. You've latched yourself onto the front of something unimaginable. You can't comprehend how badly this is going to end. You've murdered yourself. Red advances on him. Gun! Barson's mind is disintegrating, but it gets that one word out. Gun! It's on the floor between them, gleaming in the shaft of orange light pouring out of the window. Barson fights himself and wins and lunges for it, only then finding that the creeping numbness in his extremities isn't just affecting his hands. It's affecting his own ability to perceive them. He doesn't know that it's a minor antimemetic clouding effect. All he knows is that there's a stump at the end of both his arms. The gun is inoperable. All he can do is push it around the floor. He shouts miserably, helplessly. Red laughs and doesn't even bother to kick it away. The Foundation will stop you, Barson manages, like a mantra.
Red cocks his head, as if he knows the word Foundation from somewhere. Are all of them as weak as you? He concentrates. Comprehension goes both ways. Barson dimly understands what Red represents, which means Red, in turn, dimly understands what Barson represents. Red perceives the power structures which dispatched Barson into this hated burrow. Red perceives the shadows of the people at the streaming services and the mobile task force Barson doesn't know about, skulking out at the property's perimeter, waiting for a go order, which will never come. Red perceives the 4 or 5 brutal, impersonal suits seated at the top of the operation, webbing it together. One of them is toying absently with their laser strike key stick, swirling it around the back of their thumb over and over, dropping it. That's as far through headspace as Red can search, because that's the limit of the people who knows about it. Him, Red. That's the hit list. A shadow blocks out the sun again, the same one as before, for longer this time. Red looks out through the window, giving it a curt nod, and it departs.
Barson slumps to one side, dead up to the shoulders now, conscious that any of these words could be his last. He says, "You think you're in control. But it's going to kill you too. We can get you out. You can help us contain it."
Red crouches, still grinning. "Look at me. Look."
He doesn't have a choice. It hurts. Red makes sure he's being heard loudly and clearly.
"No."
Zayn 346. Samakshan.
Red blinks. "What?"
Something bleeps. A-star, Barson says. A-star.
Shit. Red looks around, suddenly genuinely alarmed. The phone. He lost track of Barson's phone. He finds it beneath the bed. He snatches it up. There's a voice authentication interface. And authentication is nearly complete. Nearly complete. Stop. Cancel. Undo. Nothing happens. Wrong voice. He drops the phone, scrambling for the gun.
Zelaki. Enora. Fire, Barson says.
Red puts a bullet through the phone, and a second through Barson's skull. He looks up at the ceiling, waiting, still alarmed, and he waits. But nothing else happens. And that's where we'll leave it, I think, for this.
We could do another chapter if you wanted.
Hang on a second. I want to skim because I know about this chapter. I remember it. I want to remember how long it is, and more importantly, what comes after it. It's a bit lengthy, but it's really good. Okay. Do you want to try? Hang on a second. Now I have to go back. I don't know how to use the chapter interface on my Kindle, so I just have to push the button a bunch of times. Besides, it'll be a little easier on your voice this next chapter. We're going to push forward and do one more, okay, everybody? But we might have to take a little break anyway because Twitch, because capitalism.
You want to do that now?
Yeah, let's go do. Everybody's all please. Okay, yes, we'll do one more, but first we have to do a little capitalism
as a treat,
as a not treat. So
for
everybody,
capitalism.
go take a little stretch. Okay, we'll be back in just a couple minutes. everybody. We're back. Just a
Hey,
reminder of content warnings before we start an extra little bonus chapter. Immemorial.
Miss Wheeler. Miss Wheeler.
Marion Wheeler has just finished a scheduled inspection of SCP-8473 and is about to go for a cigarette. Someone is running up to meet her outside 8473's containment unit. Wheeler recognizes her as Dr. Eli Moreno, a trainee field researcher who joined the Antimemetics division only 6 months ago. Dr. Moreno, can I help you with something?
Moreno interlocks her fingers nervously. She's a full head taller than Wheeler, half her age, with scraggly hair and thick glasses. She lacks experience, but she is very smart, and she is learning very smart, very fast. In another year, she'll be among the best people the division has, or ever had. Wheeler is looking forward to that.
Wheeler loves nothing more than competent people. Still, as the pause lengthens, that day of competence seems to be farther in the future. Dr. Moreno, I normally expect my people to get to the point a little quicker than this.
There's a stone in the forest behind the site, Moreno blurs. It's monumental. It's like a skyscraper. It blocks out the sun. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes?
But I've never seen it before. I don't understand how it's possible that I never saw it. Cast a shadow across the whole site. I mean, was it always there?
Yes.
Is this because...
You took your first routine dose of Obscribe's monastics this morning, yes?
That's how it works. Something that big could just be right there and we don't see it.
Yeah. Wheeler checks her watch and mentally moves around some scheduled commitments. Extend the smoke break to the rest of the afternoon. Leave the scheduled inspection of 3125 where it is. Review promotion cases after the gym instead of before. Evening meal. At this rate, never.
Ooh, I feel seen.
Moreno,
suffocating under the weight of follow-up questions, finally asks, "What is it?"
Wheeler gestures to her left down the corridor, indicating that she's about to walk and that Moreno should follow her. I'll show you.
In the database, it's SCP-9429. Moreno hasn't read the entry. She doesn't have access.
Good.
The stone is a single, unbroken 91 by 91 by 147 meter vertical cuboid of ancient weathered dark basalt. It sits at a very slight angle, leaning fractionally to the north. Its regular angles clearly mark it out as a carved object, a human-made artifact. It rises out of the forest to the east of Site 41 and dominates, not to say obliterates, the views in that direction from the windows of the site's main block. It is, by volume, massively bigger than the site itself, even including its underground extents. It looms. It is absolutely unmissable. The idea that anyone could fail to notice it for any period of time is, Wheeler has to admit, more than a little unnerving.
Wheeler leads Moreno up the short forest track to the stone's perimeter, and then right, following along. In its shadow. It's a wet day, and rain is dripping from the very top edge of the cube, as well as from the conifers, which grow right up beside it. The rain makes a constant white hiss, deadening other sounds. There's a weak antimemetic clouding effect surrounding it, she explains as she picks her way along the track ahead of Moreno. To most people, it's effectively invisible. You've been up to the top of some of these other hills, I'm sure. You should have seen it clearly from up there as well, but you look straight past it. That's normal. There's a related effect which removes people's memories after they've visited the stone. That effect is much stronger. It'll cut right through your nestic drug regimen and mine.
So we'll forget all about this.
Wheeler holds up a battered little notebook and a cheap blue ballpoint. Moreno understands. She's carrying a notebook and pen as well. Information suppression is a complicated spectrum. Sometimes a written note is the only thing which will make it out of a zone, which suppresses memories, electronic data, radio signals, and even audible sound. Alongside the mandatory Foundation issue brick phone, many Antimemetics Division operatives habitually carry some combination of an instant camera, a mechanical tape-driven dictaphone, a notebook, a walkie-talkie. Not that Moreno is expecting to need anything today. Of course, Wheeler continues, one side effect of the clouding is that I don't exactly remember the way. I guess we could set up signposts, but somehow it never gets done, and not just because of the antimemetic effects, you understand. Just plain laziness. This looks like the way up. They come to a passage in the side of the stone. In fact, it is not a passage, but a tremendously deep groove, cut all the way from the top of the cube to its base, a slot within a thin line of overcast sky visible overhead, and steps leading up. Wheeler begins to climb and Marino follows. They climb in silence for some moments. Marino stops a few times to write down a note or two, hunching over to shield her notebook from the drizzle. Then she hurries to catch up with Wheeler, who maintains a steady, indifferent pace. Some time after Marino has lost count of the steps, the steeped groove makes a 90-degree turn to the left and continues to ascend. Wheeler stops here above Marino and turns to quiz her. What do you have so far?
What is this place?
You tell me.
Marino hesitates for a moment, uncertain where this is going. Geologically speaking, this stone is an alien. At first I thought there'd been a mountain on this spot, which was excavated into this shape by human hands, but the rock itself is just wrong. It's different from the mountains and hills near here. You'd have to travel at least 500 kilometers to find basalt like this, which means it must have been excavated elsewhere, maybe carved there, and moved here.
Wheeler says nothing, but her demeanor seems to indicate that Moreno is on the right track.
Which isn't possible, Marino continues. This is a single stone. Judging from its dimensions and density, it must mass north of 3 million tons. That's now after carving, and that can't be done. Human civilization cannot move objects of this size, not in a single piece. The technology does not exist.
Correct.
So how did it get here?
Good question.
Marino waits. She doesn't have the answer to the question, so she waits for Wheeler to supply it.
But Wheeler does not. What else?
It's been engraved, Marino says, indicating the walls of the steep stepped passage, using tools. And I noticed the exterior walls are the same. There's a lot of weathering, but here and there, between the biological crud, there's this very clear, regular pattern. Right here, see? Tiny vertical rectangles, like a block cursor on an old computer terminal. Visual aid.
Or a tombstone in typography, she suggests.
Marino blinks. Yes. Yeah, it's a uniform pattern. Very detailed work, which would require quite good tools, even by modern standards. I think this pattern is supposed to cover the entire exterior of the stone. And if that's the case, the blocks are so minuscule and the stone is so large that there must have originally been hundreds of millions of them.
Correct, Wheeler says again. Anything else?
Marino thinks for a minute. She stares up into the rain, reflecting on the atmosphere that the stone or sculpture, as she supposes it would now better be described, projects. Loneliness, quiet, desolation, or intimidation, and some fear. Although with that intimidating, fearful atmosphere, there's no sensation of danger. There's no threat. We considered ourselves to be a powerful culture, she says aloud.
Wheeler hears this, but asks no follow-up questions. Apparently satisfied, she turns and continues climbing the steps. Marino follows. The passage makes several more turns, carving out an erratic, squared squiggle. Marino takes no further notes. Her knees are about ready to explode by the time they reach the top. They emerge, blinking at the light, on a wet, windswept, slightly slanted plateau. There are more of the tiny tombstone indentations underfoot. The edges of the cube are some distance away, but they are not marked. The dark gray surface just ends at a straight line not far out, and the horizon itself is below it, not visible. This gives Marino some vertigo, particularly since the surface tilts towards one corner, and the engraved basalt underfoot is slick, wet, and getting wetter. There is a small cluster of Foundation scientific equipment up here. Chunky, weatherproof units stacked up under a canopy. There's a table with a rugged, beat-up computer terminal switched off. Further away is a diesel generator. Wheeler ignores the equipment and paces away in a different direction, facing away from her Marino and out at the sky, playing with her cigarette lighter, although not actually lighting anything. The lighter is actually a tiny propane burner intended for lighting stoves, given to her by her mother before she died. Wheeler no longer remembers this.
Marina waits for a while, arms folded for warmth, gradually getting wetter. She doesn't seek cover under the canopy because Wheeler hasn't. She senses that something is about to happen. Wheeler is normally quite poised and difficult to read, but she looks apprehensive. Upset, even. Focused intently on the lighter flame, Wheeler seems to be unable to look her in the eye, as if she doesn't want to push through with the next part of whatever this is actually supposed to be. Orientation? Initiation? Hazing? What was that about getting to the point? It's a memorial, Marino says.
Huh. Wheeler snaps the lighter shut and pockets it, moderately impressed. Only moderately, though. That's right. Of course, I practically told you that when I mentioned tombstones.
How many antimemetic wars have there been?
That gets her. Damn, so much for the slow-burning theatrics. Someone told you read the entry?
No, not really. I've never seen this place before. I was just guessing.
You look embarrassed. You're embarrassed that you hit the right answer 30 minutes before I was expecting you to? You think you've shown me up, right? Eli, look at me.
She looks.
Keep operating at that level. Don't slow up for my benefit or anyone's. It's important.
Will you tell me why we're here? Marino asks for what she hopes will be the final time. And in another part of her mind, a fatal chain of calculations starts.
The problem is that every single person in the world with reliable access to high-grade nestic medication works for me. Here. And the division is pitifully understaffed. There are 40 of us, including you and me, and 40 pairs of eyes is not enough. We cannot look at enough of the world at once. There is an appallingly large percentage of the world which no human has ever properly looked at. This is unbearably limiting to all forms of antimemetic research. Antimemetic biology, paleontology, cosmology, archaeology, these disciplines, all of them barely exist. They are nowhere. Nevertheless, we have seen this culture's cities. One or two of them still exist. Pure dumb luck is how we found them. A division researcher takes a vacation, drives across Nevada while still on the dose, sees something on the horizon, that sort of thing. The cities are physically ruined, and there are heavy antimemetic effects shrouding them, which makes them nearly impossible to study, even for us. Large, simple things like this stone survived better, but even so, we think this stone was one of the last things they built before they died out. They were human. They were probably significantly more technologically advanced than we were. They existed tens of thousands of years ago, perhaps hundreds of thousands. We can't know for sure. It's difficult to determine what really happened to them because their entire cultural memeplex was lethally irradiated. Their core cultural concepts, the things they created and stood for or valued highly, can never be known or propagated again. We think an idea stole into their culture, which they did not have adaptations to defend against. A complex of ideas. A memeplectic, Keter-class end-of-world scenario. Wheeler pauses, letting the rain patter for a significant moment.
We just forgot. The rest of us who survived the war and became modern humanity, you and me and everybody, we what? We looked away? We walked away? We moved on?
Yes.
Marino staggers, vertigo swelling up and briefly getting the better of her. Hundreds of millions of people died and we just forgot. Is that what you wanted to show me? You want me to write that down?
Yes. Yes, write this down. It's the first thing you're learning today. Humans can forget anything. It's okay to forget some things because we're mortal and finite, but some things we have to remember. It's important that we remember. Write to yourself something which will make you remember.
Marino nods. It's raining too heavily, so she retreats under the canopy and uses the table. Even so, a few raindrops spatter her notes. She writes intently and rapidly for some times. What she writes is rushed and unrefined. There are large parts crossed out. She wonders how she'll react when she reads it for the first time.
After a while, Wheeler joins her under the canopy.
Marino, staring at her notes, asks Wheeler as if she doesn't already know the answer. And the second thing.
It is possible that their culture had an equivalent to the Foundation. It may have even had an anti-memetics division. If they did, their Foundation and their anti-memetics division failed them. It's a big reality. It's a big foundation. There's a lot of Keters and a lot of Keter class scenarios, so maybe the end of the world will be some other division's problem. And yes, a big part of the job we hired you for is basic research, lab work, as safe as it gets. And yes, it's been thousands of years, and it may be thousands of years more. But maybe it won't. And maybe it will be our problem. To answer your original question, there has been one anti-memetics more that we know of. Potentially others we don't know of. And there is undoubtedly one to come.
Marino says nothing. She looks dismayed, broken. She's right to be, and Wheeler is familiar with the reaction. This is indeed part of every new antimemetic division operative's orientation. The magnitude of responsibility can be hard to handle. It should be.
Welcome to the antimemetics division. This is your first day.
Marino writes for some time longer. Wheeler waits silently. The rain doesn't let up. But what was it? What was the idea?
SCP-9429-A. We isolated the main complex itself in the 70s. We have it on a slab in a Vegas room, basement level 2. It's mostly harmless now. It's so culturally alien to modern humans as to be nearly incoherent. Think Egyptian hieroglyphs. I'll show you another day.
I can read Egyptian hieroglyphs. Are you saying it couldn't come back?
In that form, it's highly unlikely.
Marino points at something far away in the sky.
Wheeler looks. There's nothing out there, just overcast sky and rain. What do you see? Under heavy nestic doses, some people say they see ghosts here. We even have some supported interview logs. Personally, I think the veracity is dubious.
It doesn't look like a ghost. It looks like an anorexic kaiju. Like a monster, a pitler made of spiders. It's taller than this stone. It is at least twice as tall. It's coming here. Is this normal?
No. Wheeler is already racing through the checklist.
What is it?
I don't know.
This isn't part of the hazing.
No, I will never lie to you, Eli, I swear. An antimemetically cloaked entity, which looks as monstrous as Marino is describing, has an approximately 0% chance of being benign. They need support. Wheeler finds out her phone has no signal. Checking Marino's is pointless, she already knows. The only way to get a message out of here is with a written note. A paper airplane thrown off the top into the woods?
It's bending down. I think it's looking at me, Marino says, watching a space in the air descend. There isn't even a hole in the rain which Wheeler can perceive. Its head is gigantic. It has to be over 10 meters wide. It has graspers and arthropod legs all over it. Dozens of eyes. Some of them are blinded. There's someone riding it.
What? Describe the writer.
Caucasian male, 20s, skinny, jeans, trainers, dirty brown hair, needs a haircut. He's been shot. He's bleeding out all over, but he doesn't seem to notice. In the liver and again in the throat, just above the clavicle. He's smiling. He says no. That never happened.
Wheeler spends a split second wondering whether the gunshot wounds are intentionally creepy detailing or whether the man is genuinely using some kind of advanced antimemetic power to ignore a mortal wound. And if the latter, how he originally sustained it, but more urgent questions are afoot. He sees you?
Yes.
Does he see me? Hear me?
Marino is transfixed and is starting to look genuinely frightened. He wants to know who I'm talking to.
Don't tell him. He doesn't get information about us. Understand? Wheeler pulls her walkie-talkie from her waist, sets it to broadcast an emergency beacon, turns and hurls it over arm as far as she possibly can in the direction of the Site 41 main building. With luck, it'll land intact in the forest outside the suppression zone cast by 9429, summoning a mobile task force. Ask who he is.
Marino is standing very still with her arms clamped rigidly at her side. Who are you? He says... He says he's nearly finished. He says he's going to kill me.
Like hell. Eli, listen to me. We're running for it. Back down the steps. If we can get to the perimeter of the stone, it'll flush our memories.
I can't move.
Wheeler hauls on one of Marino's arms. She can't be moved. Put one foot in front of the other.
It's got hold of me. Marino is goggle-eyed and starting to hyperventilate.
Wheeler disengages and surveys the situation. She can't see or touch any grasping spider legs or the monumental face which Marino can't look away from, or the writer. But she believes Marino that they're there, real for some value of real. She clasps one hand to her side, but of course she isn't carrying her sidearm because this is a safe SCP on a safe site, and why would she be? Not that it ever makes a difference when this mythical writer is about to laugh off gunshot wounds. There aren't enough options in front of her. She very badly wants to swear and bites down hard on her tongue.
Marino screams.
Eli, don't look at it. Look at me.
I can't.
You're stronger than this.
I'm not.
You're the best we have. I'm not making that up. You're seeing this thing when nobody else could. That makes you smarter and stronger. You can fight it. Invasion drill.
It hates us so much, Marino says. I can't think through it. I can't see. Please, please don't.
Wheeler knocks her out. She circles behind Marino, plants one hand on her shoulder for stability, and punches her behind the ear. Marino sags in place, then falls forward to her knees. Wheeler is just about able to catch her before her skull connects with the ground. But she didn't hit her hard enough. Marino is unconscious only for a second. She struggles as she comes back. It's like she's waking from a nightmare into another nightmare. She clutches at Wheeler's hand. She can't scream. Her heart stops. Wheeler rolls her over and administers CPR, but without equipment, there's very little chance of her restarting Marino's heart. Nobody's coming. She didn't throw the walkie-talkie far enough. It's almost 15 minutes before she gives up. And then Wheeler is collapsed against the wall of the passage on the next to last step, about to leave 9429's field of influence, trying to figure out what in the fuck she can possibly write to herself. What the hell was that thing? All Marino did was think of it, and it killed her. She was as good as any of us. She was as capable as she was ever going to be, and she wasn't good enough. How do you fight an antimemetic monster which only eats the best antimemeticists? You could try to build some kind of counter meme, but you need to be shielded while you worked on it. You need a hermetically sealed, self-sustaining lab as big as an arcology, like the ones Bart Hughes used to build, like the one under Site 41. God, how long have we been fighting this thing?
There's rustling behind her. She turns to look. Far away up the steps, there he is. The rider Marino described. A scrawny young man with a hostile frown and, yes, 2 steadily oozing gunshot wounds. His shoes are soaked in blood. He calls out, "Marion Wheeler! I owe you for the lake."
Wheeler stands up. She doesn't know what lake he's talking about, but she says nothing.
The rider gestures. Blue and brown and black spiders of all sizes cascade around the corner, flooding the passageway up to his knees, pouring over his shoulders, tumbling down towards Wheeler. They make a strange organic rustling as they pour like wet leaves. There must be millions of them. The spiders would probably be much more effective if she was at all afraid of them.
It's too bad. She's just learned a great deal about this entity, that they have history together, that it personally dislikes her, and that it apparently has a humanoid mouthpiece and a lousy imagination. But she's only a second before the cascade of arachnids overcomes her, and there's not enough time to write even a single word. Marino's death, then, seems for nothing. She steps backwards over the threshold. The rain is finally easing off. Wheeler lights a cigarette and heads back to the main building. It's almost time for her scheduled inspection of 3125.